right. Esther. It starts with an E. I almost wanted to say Exodus, but no, we've already done Exodus. All right, Esther chapter 4. We're going to read the whole chapter. Esther chapter 4. It says this: when Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, whenever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, fasting and weeping and lamentation. And many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her the queen was deeply distressed, she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor, plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law: to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. And Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered. All right. Can you remember a time when you felt helpless to solve a problem? And if so, what'd you do about it? Can you remember a time when you felt helpless to solve a problem? And if so, what did you do about it? What do you think? First of all, have you ever felt that way? Can you ever remember a time that you felt helpless to solve a problem? Yeah, all right. So we all have that as a common. Anybody not have that happen? Oh, it's a pretty common. Anybody remember how you handled it?
I call Clay. Seriously, I didn't know.
Clay to the rescue.
I didn't know how to handle a burden like that.
Oh,
Seriously.
You don't, sometimes you just don't know how to handle a situation, and you don't know what to do, and you have to call for this, and just don't.
So
You don't feel good about it, right?
Okay.
I wouldn't,
Asking for help?
right,
Okay.
right. Or running into a situation where you can't help somebody, you can't do something, we wouldn't feel good about it, right?
Okay, yeah. So what you did, Mike, is you ran into a problem, something you couldn't solve. You called a brother in Christ.
Yeah.
Say, hey, can you help me? All right. So you leaned on someone else. Okay. Anybody else? I can tell you that I can remember times, as I thought about this question, I was thinking about myself, I can remember times of wallowing in my misery. That's how I handled it. I don't know if any of you have ever done that, but I've sat there and thought, I can't handle this. Life's out of control. I'm going to sit here and be miserable. Anybody ever do that, or is it just me?
Oh, every afternoon.
All right. I'm not with you that much, Luther, but I understand. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just being honest. I think back, and sometimes I've handled it in a very poor way. Maybe you've had that experience too, where things seemed out of control and you didn't handle it the right way. You just simply wallowed in self-pity and in self-misery. And did it get any better? Probably not. Usually it didn't get better. But I can also remember times when I faced the problems head on, right? There was an issue coming, I faced it head on in different ways. And you, Mike, you faced it head on. You said, let me call for help. And that's a way to, I may not know how to fix a car or get a bird out of my house or something. So there might be someone else around that I rely on. Anybody else? How else did you handle it? All right. How did Mordecai react to the king's edict? Everybody know what an edict is? What's an edict?
We're gonna do it.
Proclamation. Yeah. A command, a written command of something that's going to happen. It's authoritative, right? It's authoritative. So it's usually a written document in the ancient world. Has some kind of stamp of approval, some kind of authority, some kind of, for my Revelation class, some kind of a seal on it, right? Mark, a seal, signet ring, something like that. He tears his clothes. All right. And then he also did one other thing. Well, you could say two. One or two other things are in there as well.
He was wailing loudly.
Wailing loudly in public. He's out there crying and wailing in the city, in the city area, right, where the gates are and stuff. So he tore his clothes, he put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out crying and wailing. And this is not just whimpering. Loudly. This was a big show, right? And it's not a show in the sense of he was just making stuff up. No, everybody would have heard this. Everybody would have seen what was going on. At least everybody in that vicinity would have understood that. Yeah, he is distraught, and he's crying out. He's crying.
What is sackcloth and ashes exactly?
Well, that was my question. What are sackcloth and ashes? So thank you for bringing that up. That was the very next question. So let's talk about it. What do you think? What are sackcloth and ashes? What's sackcloth? Let's start there. Anybody know what sackcloth is?
Toe sack.
Like a flour bag? What'd you say, Luther?
Toe sack.
A toe sack?
Yeah. Feed sack.
A burlap? Oh, a feeds. Okay, a toe. All right.
You've never heard of a toe sack before?
Tote? Because it sounds like he's saying a toe sack.
T-O-E.
I never had toes in a sack, so I didn't know what a toe sack was on my. All right, so a sack for feed or burlap or something. Yeah, that's what it is. It's hard, it's itchy,
Rough.
it's rough. It feels very hard and scratchy and uncomfortable on your skin. So why would anybody ever put sackcloth on their bare body? Okay, they're making a point.
Really without food.
Okay.
They're trying to heal God, really.
Okay. Yeah, the sackcloth is to make their body feel the way their emotions are feeling.
Do the ashes go on their face, the ash part?
Yeah, the ashes would go on their body, on their face and stuff. And what would you typically put on your face in the ancient world? Anybody know? We cook with it today. Yeah, olive oil. Olive oil would be, it would give you a nice glow. It was a way that it was for men or women. It was just a modern, it was an ancient way of kind of your morning routine. Right? You'd wash your face, you'd put on oil, you'd look good, you'd look a little maybe glistening and all that good stuff. With the ashes, you're doing the opposite. Yeah. 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 And Mordecai is a Jew, but people did this in the ancient world anyway. The purpose of the sackcloth, the purpose of the ashes was to make your body feel the same way that your emotions felt. It was an external expression of how you were feeling internally. And of course, as Paul mentions, for a devout follower of God or something, it was a way of kind of prostrating before the Lord as well, and just kind of being humble and broken and all of that. So there's a lot that goes on with that. Psalm 30 verse 11 says this. It says, you have turned for me my mourning into dancing. Not your mourning as you wake up in the morning, but your lamenting, right? My mourning into dancing. You have loosed my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness. So there, the removal of the sackcloth in that psalm is the idea of removing the suffering, removing the mourning and the sorrows and the brokenness from the person. So when you were brokenhearted, when you were, and it could be for a number of reasons. It's associated with an emotional response. Sometimes it's associated with repentance. Is that what's going on with Mordecai? Is he repenting? No. Sometimes it had to do with repentance. Sometimes it had to do with petition. Sometimes it simply had to do with the mourning of a loss. Mordecai really seems to be mourning for the people, for himself, as well as the Jewish people. This is a lament, right? But sometimes sackcloth and ashes are associated with those other things as well. So he is broken, he is upset, and his body and his appearance are all going to reflect that. And that's what's going on with the sackcloth and ashes. So what did Esther do when she heard that Mordecai was in deep grief?
But he was in good clothes.
Yeah. She sends him clothes in order to do what?
Cover him up.
Cover him up, but something more than that. Change him, comfort him, change his attitude, right? Not necessarily his outward clothing, but the clothing would be symbolic of other things. She's trying to comfort him. She's trying to cheer him up, trying to say, get out of that. You don't need to be, almost like somebody saying, hey, just cheer up. You ever been in deep distress and somebody just says, cheer up? That's kind of what she's doing, right? Hey, just cheer up. She doesn't know all the circumstances, but and listen, let's give her the best intentions, and let's give the people who say that to us the best intentions. Sometimes people don't know how to respond, and she's kind of doing the best she can do. She's saying, I see that he's in mourning. I see that he's in sackcloth and ashes. Send him some clothing. I want you to be comforted. I want you to get out of whatever. I want you to cheer up. Well, she doesn't know the full story. It's not that easy. And for us, sometimes it's not that easy for somebody simply to say, hey, cheer up. You ever have somebody come along and say, you have so many good things. And they say something like, count your blessings. And you think, right now might not be the time. Right now might not be the time for that. Why don't you just sit with me? Let's mourn together. How about that? Sometimes that's the best response. But again, we give people the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes maybe we've done it to people too. We've wanted to comfort them. We wanted to be with them. We didn't know what to say. We did the best we could. I think that's what's going on here. I think Esther has the best intentions. She's trying to cheer him up. She's trying to comfort him, and she sends him clothing, right? What proof, though, does Mordecai send to Esther about what the king's edict is all about? Because he sends back a response. Listen, the king is going to have all the Jews murdered. They were all going to be killed. That's the edict. So what does Mordecai send to Esther in order to show her that?
Send her a copy of the deed.
Yeah. He sends her a copy of it. Now, why do you think he sends that to her? Do you think that she needed to see it herself?
No, that's after he sent verbal to the king's attendant.
Yeah.
Backed it up with that. I think, yeah, he wants it to sink in. Look what we're facing.
Yeah.
And then later on, he's going to point out that you're not going to be excused for that. Just because you're in the king's household.
Absolutely. You know,
Well, it was his way of saying, you just don't understand the situation.
yeah, you don't understand what's going on. This is serious. You might, maybe she doesn't believe it. Maybe it's, you know, the reality is that sometimes we have a hard time believing the incredible without hard evidence. Somebody tells us something that we think, man, that just seems a little bit much, right? Mordecai says, listen, all the Jews are going to be killed. Esther's thinking, maybe, I don't know for sure, but I could imagine being a nurse thinking, all of them? Is that real? You know what I mean? Like, are you, maybe somebody's being mean to you and you, I don't know, but sometimes we need a little extra evidence. And so that's what he does. He gives that evidence of, here you go. Here is a copy of what the king is going to do, and even gives what else? Tells the amount of, amount of money. Yeah, he's given all this evidence. This is a real thing that's going to happen. So what did Mordecai want Esther to do to help the people? To help the Jewish people, what did he want her to do?
Go to the king.
Yeah, go to the king and do what? Beg, plead for mercy, plead for mercy, beg and plead for mercy. Why is Esther afraid to do what Mordecai wants her to do?
Getting called for in a month.
Okay.
And
I'm not sure that he knew that she was a Jew.
Well, that has been kept. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
The beginning of the book, that was not revealed. So nobody knows, as far as we know, and as far as they know, nobody knows that Esther is a Jew, or if there are a few, it might be a small circle of people who actually know that. So nobody, it's not public knowledge at this point. The king probably does not know, right? Especially when we look at later on what happens. He doesn't know. It's unlikely, right? It's unlikely that he would sign a death certificate for his wife, who he's not angry with her, right? I mean, he's not angry with Esther. He loves her. She's, beautiful and wonderful and all that. It's unlikely that he'd be like, knowingly, yeah, I know she's a Jew. Let's kill all the Jews. She can go too. That's probably not going on. So he doesn't know what's going on there. But why is it a risk?
because the king has a law that anyone who enters the inner court without being summoned and puts to death unless it sends his golden cup.
Yeah, and it doesn't appear that happened often. It wasn't like, well, that's kind of a rule, but everybody breaks that rule.
And would that be just like Esther that was insulated and didn't know what the edict was? Do you think Mordecai did not know that was a court rule?
I don't think so. Mordecai seems to be remember, he's in the service of the king, and he's of a fairly good rank. What exactly, I don't know, but he's a fairly good rank and status there. He's got some privileges and stuff. I don't think he is ignorant of this situation. But the law was, and again, it does not appear that this was a common practice for the king to simply give the scepter, because then it wouldn't really be much to worry about, would it? If like, well, 99.9% of the time he always gives you the scepter, it's not a big deal. No, this must be a very rare occasion, because Esther she's concerned about it. And the king really does like her. She is the queen. She's got a special status. within the harem and all that. So, but she is fearful of that, right? She's fearful of entering the king's presence, the inner court of the king's presence.
Well, I think early on, too, it kind of seemed to me like you never quite knew what you were gonna get with the king either. If you've been drinking and partying and.
That's right.
I mean, you just don't know what you're gonna walk into.
That's right. You ever know people like that? You know, you just don't know what kind of person you're going to meet. They could be happy-go-lucky, or they could be angry, hurtful, vicious. Yeah, I think you're right that we don't know what Xerxes is doing here. We don't know what kind of character he might, what kind of a mood he might be in. So yeah, there's a lot of this fear that's going. Do you think it's unreasonable fear? Do you think Esther is just, come on, girl, don't be silly. There's no fear here. You shouldn't be worried about this.
No, I think it's real.
I think it's a reasonable fear. I think it's a reasonable fear, right? So what did Mordecai say to Esther about her fear? Verses 12 through 14. What's he say?
Well, God's going to do something, whether you do or not, but our family's there's going to be a lot of people killed, and you may be one of them.
Well, he doesn't say you may be.
Yeah, we will.
He says you're going to be dead. Don't think that you're going to escape just because you're in the king's palace. You know, and then he says,
Maybe that's why you were there.
yeah, there's a couple things he brings up, isn't it? First of all, he says, don't you dare think that you will escape. This is going to come knocking at your door. And then he says, if you don't rise up, someone else will rise up. You're not going to be saved, but someone else will rise up. And then he says, and who knows, maybe it's for this very purpose that you're here. And behind this is what? What is he thinking? Who's he thinking about that he doesn't mention specifically? God. God is behind this, right? God is never mentioned specifically here in the book of Esther. It's one of the interesting things about Esther. It was one of the reasons why some Jewish people, some people did not accept it as part of the canon. They had debates over whether this should be part of the Jewish Old Testament, part of the Old Testament, because it never mentions the name of God in it. And so it's a unique feature of it. But what you see is behind this, you see the very character of God in the midst of all this kind of thing. So yeah, he's got a number of these questions. Ultimately, he believes that God is sovereign, and God is going to rescue his people, whether it's through her or someone else. God is going to rise up, and God is going to raise up someone to deliver his people. So then after Esther agrees to go to see the king, what does she do in order to prepare to meet with the king? 15 and 16. What's it?
Fasting and praying for other people and for her people among her.
She's got a bird in her house she doesn't know how to get rid of. Right?
What?
She's got a bird in her house she don't know how to get rid of. Right? So what'd she do? She's got a problem. You had a bird in your house. What'd you do? You called the brother in Christ. Can I get some help? She's got a bird in her house. She's got a problem. She's going to rely on, now she's obviously going to fast and pray. She's going to go seek the Lord's counsel. Doesn't say that, but that's what she's doing. But she's also getting
Her maid. Yeah.
and other Jewish,
Yeah, all of them.
right? She's getting other people to fast and pray with her. I need help, right? What's she doing? She's gathering the community of believers to say, help me in this. Now they've got a share in it of what's going to go on and all of that. They're affected by it, but she doesn't simply go and do this all by herself. She's leaning on others. She's asking others to do the same thing. So go ahead.
Well, I think this is her maids. Her maids are gonna fast with her.
Yeah.
And then the king's unit, she said the king's unit back and forth. So obviously he knows what's going on, but
He does.
she obviously has some kind of loyalty from some of those within.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. She's gathering people to help her in this. But it's not just them, it's Mordecai and it's some of these other Jews as well. But you're right. Yeah, they've got a bit of a connection there. Now, and that would happen in the ancient world. The eunuchs, that's why they were eunuchs, taking care of the king's harem, because they would be intimately involved with them. That's why they would be eunuchs, because you would build a relationship and a bond. And we all know what may happen. So kings would say that's not going to happen. You're going to be eunuchs. And but they would be in close relationship, right? Close friends. They would share a lot of intimacy there. But so it's a good point that you bring up. Good point. What is the purpose of fasting in the Bible? We know what prayer is all about. What's the point of fasting?
Same reason you wear sackcloth.
Okay, very similar reasons, right? You're going to make your physical body share in your grief, your sufferings.
Concentrated on this one thing.
Yeah.
And not worried with what. That would be hard for me not to worry about what I'm gonna get for a snack when I get home.
Yeah, yeah. Every time you had hunger pains, you would be reminded of whatever it is you're going through. Now, and again, biblically, people fasted for different reasons. They fasted when they were in mourning and sorrows and sufferings. They fasted when they were in repentance, repenting. They had broken God's heart. They had broken God's law. They would fast and pray, put on sackcloth and ashes, those kinds of things. All these kind of go together. There are similar concepts that are being here. So like the sackcloth and ashes, the fasting was a physical way for connecting your prayers and your emotions. It was a way of connecting your physical to your spiritual. It was all connected and showing God that you were serious. God knows if you're serious or not, but it was a way of expressing that towards God.
We need food to survive.
We do.
So, I mean, that's something you're giving up for survival, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just how.
No, you're right. If you don't eat long enough, you will die. And shorter time, if you don't drink something, you die quicker.
And fasting never included not drinking, right? It was always food. Yeah.
And sometimes drinking. Don't eat or drink anything. Read the text. You can't go very long without water. You can't go very long without water, but sometimes it did include without water. Yeah, without a drink. Yep. It usually was not 40 days without water. But yeah, sometimes, not always, but sometimes it included not drinking as well. And we could get into the yeah, well, I mean, I think, and Lacey may know more about the medical sides of these things, but I think depending on the person and the situation and where you are, it can be anywhere between, 4 to 7 days without water? And that would be the max, right? 7 days would be it. 4 or 5 is average. Yeah. Yeah, I remember hearing about that kind of thing as well. So this is 3 days that they're going to fast and pray and all of that. Sometimes it included water, sometimes it didn't. You could drink water as well. But fasting had different characteristics. Sometimes you would fast for a portion of the day. Sometimes you fast for the whole day. Sometimes you would fast for a number of days. And then there are times where it clearly is miraculous, where somebody is fasting for a very long period of time and may actually include water, but they're being sustained miraculously in those situations. But usually a fast was abstaining from food, and if it was water, it was just a short period of time, a couple days at the most. All right, so what, and I don't think we should ever downplay the role, and I think we see it here, downplay of the role of the physical, because humans are both physical and spiritual creatures. And so there is a connection between the physical and the spiritual. And we see that with the sackcloth and ashes. We see that with the fasting. We see that with the prayer. All of these things go hand in hand biblically. It's the physical and the spiritual. The physical and the spiritual. And so in light of that, what two physical things did God give the church that are also spiritual? We could talk about more things, but there's two specific things I'm thinking about.
Bread.
What's that?
Bread and grape.
Okay, that's one. I'm counting that as one. So the supper, that's a physical act, but it is also meant to be spiritual, right? It's not just physical, it's meant to be both. And then there's one other. In baptism, I say physical act that has spiritual ramifications, or it should, right? Because we are both physical and spiritual creatures. Never one or the other. We're both. We're both. We could talk about it, but that's the point of the resurrection as well. We're not meant to be disembodied souls. God made humans physical and spiritual connected together. Topic for another time, but resurrection is included in these kind of concepts of both physical and spiritual things. We do ourselves a disservice and we become like the Gnostics, which was a group of heretics in the ancient world who believed that everything was spiritual and everything physical was evil. So you could go and do what you wanted physically, wouldn't touch the spiritual. Many in the church have become very Gnostic in their views of things, thinking about it's only about the spiritual and not about the physical as well. We are both. We are both creatures, physical and spiritual creatures. All right. If I can move on to that. What kind of character traits does Esther exemplify? What are some of the character traits you see in her?
Humility and
All right, there's a humility, you would say. What else? All right, she's gentle. She seems to come off that way. Sure. Caring, gentle and caring, right? She wants to give Mordecai some clothing, wants to comfort him. Gentleness. What else?
Reverent, the king's rule.
Yeah, she wants to honor. Yeah.
she's obedient to Mordecai. I mean, she still has a real strong connection.
Yeah. So there's a trust.
Outside the court. I mean,
Yeah.
you feel her.
Obedient, trustworthy.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a trustworthiness. Loyal, you could say, loyal. And what about courageous?
Yeah, there's some resolve.
Yeah, courage doesn't mean that you don't have fear. It's stepping out in light of, in the midst of fear, right? It's doing what's right, even when it's hard to do. It's doing that fearful thing in spite of it being fearful and going forward. So there's courage. She shows her courage eventually. All right, we're running out of time, so let's have the homework question here to think about. What can you do to prepare yourself to deal with challenges that require courage in the face of fear, that require you to press forward? What are some things that you can do? How can you prepare yourself for those challenges in the future? So take that home, think about that. All right, any other thoughts, questions, comments, or concerns? If not,